My brothers and my sisters, I feel the Spirit of the living God moving already, because this word is not just a message. It's a lifeline for somebody who's been walking through the valley of lost time. You've been wrestling with regret, mourning over missed opportunities, and wondering if what you lost will ever be found again. But I came to declare God is the God of restoration, and He's about to redeem the years the locusts have eaten. Restoration begins with a renewed hunger for God's presence. This is the very foundation, the first signpost on the road back to wholeness. Before God ever gives you the thing you lost, He begins by turning your heart back toward Him. When you're in the midst of lost years, often you find yourself disconnected, not just from people, not just from purpose, but from the very presence of God. Life, disappointment, grief, and distraction all conspire to pull you away from the source of your strength. But when restoration begins, the first thing God does is reawaken your desire for Him. This isn't just about going to church more. This isn't about checking off a religious box or returning a ritual. This is a deep, unshakable longing that starts to bubble up in your spirit, a hunger that no entertainment, no relationship, no success can satisfy. You find yourself longing for stillness, craving quiet moments with God, needing to hear His voice more than you need another opinion from people. This hunger is spiritual. It's not something you can manufacture. It is planted in you by the Spirit of God Himself. And when it begins to grow, it signals that heaven has started a recovery plan on your behalf. This is often subtle at first. You may not even recognize it. You'll just feel a discomfort with the things that used to distract you. The same shows, the same circles, the same activities. They don't feed you anymore. You find yourself scrolling past what used to hold your attention and sitting longer in silence, wanting something deeper. You're no longer okay with surface level connection. You want truth. You want intimacy. You want God. This is how you know He's calling you back. Not just to fix what was broken, to reconnect you to the power source. Sometimes we think restoration is about fixing things around us, but true restoration always begins within. Before God sends the harvest, He softens the soil. He's tilling your heart. He's breaking up the hardened ground so that His word can take root again. That hunger you feel is the Holy Spirit cultivating space inside you, making room for more of God. It may be uncomfortable. You may feel exposed, but don't resist it, because it's a sign that you're being prepared for something greater. You start waking up in the night with scriptures on your heart. You feel drawn to worship even when life is heavy. You begin to weep, not because of sadness, but because you sense something shifting in your soul. This is what it feels like when hunger is being stirred up. And it's not random, it's restoration. It's heaven reaching down and pulling you closer. Because before He restores the job, the family, the dream, He restores the altar. He calls you back to the place where you and Him used to walk together in the cool of the day. This hunger recalibrates your priorities. What you used to chase loses its value. You begin to crave what can't be bought or posted or praised. You want Him, just Him. And in that place of holy longing, restoration begins to take root. Because now, you're no longer asking for things to comfort your flesh. You're asking for more of Him to transform your spirit. And that is a prayer heaven always answers. You might be in a season where nothing seems to be changing on the outside, but if that hunger is alive in you, you're already being restored. Because the presence of God is not the reward for restoration, it is the source. And once your heart is realigned, everything else will follow. God restores from the inside out. That's why your appetite is the first to change. That's why your desires begin to shift. That's why the places that once felt like home now feel foreign. Because He's calling you back into alignment. He's preparing you for the next chapter. And it all starts with a simple, holy hunger. Fruit begins to grow in previously barren places. This is one of the clearest and most undeniable signs that God is restoring the lost years in your life. For a long time, it felt like everything you tried failed to take root. You sowed prayers but saw no harvest. You gave love but reaped rejection. You made investments of time, energy, and passion, but nothing seemed to return to you. That barrenness wasn't just physical or financial. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal. You began to feel like your effort didn't matter, like your obedience didn't make a difference. The ground of your life felt cursed, unresponsive, indifferent to your pain. But when God begins to restore, the same places that once gave you nothing begin to yield fruit. He doesn't always take you somewhere new. Often, He changes what's happening in the place you're already planted. The job you once hated suddenly becomes a place of favor. The relationship that felt like a burden begins to bloom with understanding and growth. The ministry that looked like a failure starts producing impact and testimonies. The same soil, the same seed, but a different result. That's how you know God has touched it. God's restoration isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as peace where there was once anxiety. It's the phone call that leads to reconciliation after years of silence. It's a new opportunity rising out of an old failure. He doesn't erase the past, He redeems it. And when that redemption process begins, barren places respond. What used to ignore your effort now rewards your faith. What once mocked your prayers now reflects your breakthrough. That's fruit. That's evidence. That's restoration. Fruit in barren places doesn't just show up externally, it begins internally. You start noticing the fruit of the Spirit growing in places where flesh once dominated. You used to respond with bitterness, now you respond with grace. You used to walk in fear, now you walk in faith. You used to be reactive, now you're prayerful. This is fruit. This is growth. This is divine restoration at work in your character. Because God isn't just restoring your outcomes, He's restoring your identity. Some of the most powerful fruit comes quietly. It doesn't always look like promotion or possessions. Sometimes the fruit is the ability to rest without guilt. Sometimes it's the clarity to say no when your people pleasing would have said yes. Sometimes the fruit is self-control, discernment, and the wisdom to wait on God's timing. Barren seasons don't just steal your opportunities. They try to rob your maturity. But when God begins to restore, He grows you in the very place where life tried to stunt you. What makes this fruit so powerful is that it grows in unexpected places. It's not the fertile, obvious places that make people marvel. It's the dry, cracked soil suddenly producing abundance. That's what makes people say, surely the Lord has done this. That's when restoration becomes a testimony, not just a private healing. Because everyone knew what your life looked like when it was barren. So when fruit starts to appear, they know it wasn't your strategy, it was your surrender. It wasn't your perfection, it was His mercy. You may find yourself surprised at where the fruit is growing. Sometimes the place you wanted to escape becomes the place where God brings the most growth. Sometimes the person you wrote off becomes the partner in your healing. Sometimes the weakness you tried to hide becomes the womb of your anointing. God is sovereign. He doesn't need ideal conditions. He just needs your yes. And when you remain in Him, when you abide, He brings life out of what looked dead. This fruit is not fragile. It's not temporary. It's the result of pruning, pressing, and perseverance. It's born out of obedience in seasons where nothing made sense. So when it starts to grow, you cherish it. You recognize it as a gift. And it becomes the first sign of many that restoration is not just a promise. It's a process that has already begun. Dormant dreams and passions are reignited. This is one of the most personal and profound signs that God is restoring your lost years. There are seasons in life when the fire you once carried begins to flicker, not because you weren't called, not because the dream wasn't real, but because disappointment, delay, and discouragement buried what once burned in you. Life can be heavy, responsibilities mount, betrayal hits, and the longer you wait without seeing fruit, the more you start to question whether you ever truly heard God in the first place. Dreams that once kept you awake at night become memories you try to forget during the day. Passions that used to propel you feel like distant echoes. But when God begins to restore, the first thing He often does is breathe on what went dormant. Dreams you thought had expired start to come alive again, not with the frantic energy of striving, but with the quiet fire of divine purpose. You start to remember what used to move you. You feel stirred by visions you haven't thought about in years. And even though nothing may have changed externally, something within you is waking up. It's not nostalgia, it's resurrection. God is bringing back what you thought was gone for good, but this time it's refined by fire. purified through pain and grounded in truth. The reigniting of passion doesn't always look like sudden action. Sometimes it's a subtle internal shift. You find yourself daydreaming again, but this time with direction. You begin to write down ideas, not because you have a platform, but because you sense preparation. You read books, you seek wisdom, you pray with expectation, not because doors have opened, but because you believe they will. That's how restoration works. God revives the inner world before he moves in the outer one. He gets your spirit pregnant with purpose again before he delivers you into new territory. When passion returns, it often feels different than before. You're not chasing applause this time. You're not driven by insecurity or comparison. There's a deeper motive now. It's about obedience, not outcome. It's about pleasing him, not proving anything to them. That shift is what makes this reigniting sustainable. Because now, your passion isn't rooted in popularity, it's rooted in presence. You're burning for God, not just for goals. And that's a fire that can't be put out by disappointment. This reigniting also comes with clarity. Things that used to feel overwhelming now seem possible. You're not as concerned with timelines because you've matured into trusting God's timing. The same dream, but now you see it with wiser eyes. You've been through enough to know that success without surrender isn't worth it. So when the dream starts rising again, it comes wrapped in humility. You no longer idolize the vision, you honor the one who gave it. And that makes all the difference. What's powerful is that God doesn't always give you a new dream. Sometimes he breathes new life into the original one. The one you gave up on, the one others talked you out of, the one you buried under the weight of fear and failure. He brings it back to your remembrance, not to torment you with what could have been, but to remind you of what still can be. The enemy tried to convince you that too much time had passed, that you missed your moment. But restoration doesn't operate on your clock. God is not late. He is timeless. And when he moves, everything lost is caught up in his grace. As the dream returns, so does the energy to pursue it. What once drained you now excites you. What you avoided, you now embrace. You begin to move with intentionality again, not rushing, but flowing. That flow is a sign. It's God saying, I'm not done with you yet. That old idea starts feeling new again. That passion you thought was gone starts burning again. That plan you shelved starts unfolding again. This is how God restores the years, not just by replacing what was lost, but by reigniting what still lives in you, waiting to be awakened. Divine reversals begin to manifest. This is one of the most visible and powerful signs that God is actively restoring the years that were lost. A divine reversal is when God steps into a situation and turns it completely around, not just partially, not just slightly, but drastically and unmistakably. It's when what the enemy meant for evil begins to work together for your good. It's when the no that once shut you down becomes the yes that launches you forward. These reversals don't happen because you manipulated circumstances, but because the hand of God moved with sovereign authority on your behalf. There comes a time in the restoration process where heaven interrupts the narrative that life has been writing. It's that moment when rejection turns into redirection. The place that looked like your greatest failure becomes the ground of your greatest testimony. You were overlooked, and suddenly you're being pursued. You were counted out, and now you're being called back in. Divine reversals don't just change outcomes. They change perspectives. They make you look again at places you had given up on. They make you reconsider what you thought was over. Because when God reverses something, he doesn't need to explain himself. He simply shifts it. These reversals often begin subtly. A conversation that felt close suddenly reopens. A relationship that ended in bitterness starts to soften. A door you walked away from in pain is now swinging open with opportunity. What makes these moments divine is that they carry the unmistakable fingerprint of God. You know it wasn't your charm, your connections, or your planning. It was grace, pure grace. And that grace doesn't just reverse the circumstances, it rewrites your story. Sometimes the reversal happens within you before it happens around you. You start to see your past differently. What once embarrassed you now empowers you. What once felt like a curse now looks like a setup. God doesn't change your history. He redeems it. That internal reversal is a crucial part of restoration because it frees you from shame. You no longer walk around trying to hide what you've been through. You start to testify. You start to speak boldly because the very thing that tried to break you has become the evidence of God's faithfulness. There are also moments when divine reversals come suddenly. It's the unexpected phone call, the unanticipated email, the opportunity that comes out of nowhere. People will look at your life and say, that came out of the blue. But you'll know it came from God, because what people call coincidence, the Spirit calls covenant. These reversals are not random. They are strategic. They are perfectly timed by a God who knows how to restore not just what you lost, but what you thought could never be recovered. These moments can feel overwhelming. You may feel unprepared, unqualified, or unsure of how to respond, but that's the beauty of a divine reversal. It's not about your strength. It's about your surrender. You don't have to know how it's going to unfold. You just have to know that it's Him doing it. God specializes in flipping the script. He turns last into first. He turns mourning into joy. He turns humiliation into honor. And when He does it in such a way that nobody can take the credit but Him. Divine reversals also bring reconciliation. People who left you begin to reach back out. Conversations that ended in conflict now return with humility. It's not that time healed it. It's that God touched it. What you thought would remain broken forever suddenly becomes whole again. Not because you begged. Not because you forced it, but because you waited on the Lord. And when God restores, He doesn't just fix what was broken. He makes it better than it was before. The reversal becomes a sign, a marker, a memorial that declares, God stepped in right here. You begin to see movement in areas that were stagnant. You begin to see peace in places where there was war. You begin to see favor where there was frustration. And you realize restoration is not a theory, it's your new reality. Unlikely voices confirm God's promises. One of the most subtle yet profound signs of restoration is when God begins to echo His word through people you never expected. These confirmations don't come from your usual sources of encouragement. They're not always from your pastor, your mentor, or even your closest spiritual confidants. They come from strangers, unexpected acquaintances, coworkers, or even enemies. The same promise God whispered to you in the dark is now being repeated in places you never anticipated hearing it. This is no coincidence. It's divine orchestration. God is making sure you know. You didn't imagine it, and you're not crazy. He really did say it, and He is going to do it. When you're walking through years that feel lost, you often begin to doubt whether you ever heard God correctly. You may question your discernment, your timing, your decision-making. Restoration can feel slow, and in that waiting, it's easy to let discouragement drown out faith. But God, in His faithfulness, won't let your spirit die under the weight of silence. So He speaks through voices you weren't even listening for. Someone sends a message that lines up exactly with what you were praying about the night before. A conversation at work randomly touches on the very scripture you've been holding on to. A sermon you stumble across online unpacks the exact word you needed. These aren't accidents. They are divine confirmations. God often uses unlikely voices to bypass our pride and remind us He's still moving. Sometimes, if the affirmation came from a familiar place, we'd dismiss it as sentiment. But when it comes from someone who knows nothing about your situation, someone who has no emotional investment in your journey, it carries weight. It strikes a deeper chord. Because then you know this wasn't them talking, this was God speaking through them. And in that moment, you feel seen, you feel validated. You feel remembered by the one who made the promise in the first place. Unlikely voices also serve to reawaken what's gone dormant. You may have stopped praying bold prayers. You may have started settling, shrinking, hiding, but then someone says something that stirs your spirit. They remind you of something you haven't spoken aloud in years. They trigger a memory, a vision, a hope that had been buried beneath disappointment. That stirring is a sign that restoration is underway. Because before God restores externally, He speaks life internally. He sends a word to wake you up again. And sometimes that word comes from the most unexpected source. These confirmations often come at the precise moment you were about to give up. You were on the verge of walking away, of dropping the dream, of accepting defeat. And then nowhere, someone says exactly what you needed to hear. not with religious jargon, not with forced encouragement, but with spirit-led precision. It cuts through the fog of doubt and reminds you, God is not finished. He's still watching. He's still working. He's still committed to completing what he started in you. Sometimes the unlikely voice is someone who once doubted you. Someone who saw you at your lowest and now can't help but acknowledge the grace that's covering your life. Other times, it's someone who doesn't even believe what you believe, but they're still moved to speak something that aligns with what God already told you. That's how intentional God is. He will use whoever he needs to use to get a word to you. Because when God restores, he confirms. He sends signs, and one of the clearest signs is that his word starts coming back to you from every angle. These moments may seem small, but they carry the weight of heaven behind them. They are like breadcrumbs on the path back to purpose. Each voice, each word, each confirmation is a reminder that you're not walking blind, you're being led. And the same God who gave you the promises is now echoing it through mouths you never expected. That echo is your assurance. That sound is your signal. And when the unlikely voices begin to align with what God spoke in your spirit, it's more than encouragement. It's evidence that restoration is in progress. Direction shifts without losing divine desire. One of the quiet indicators that God is restoring your lost years is when he begins to steer your life in a new direction, yet the fire for his purpose within you remains just as strong. It can be a confusing place to be, to feel pulled in a new way while still holding on to the same hunger for God's will. You're not abandoning the call, you're adjusting the course. You're not losing passion, you're gaining precision. The restoration process often involves redirection because some of the roads you took during your season of loss were never meant to be permanent paths. They were detours, training grounds, places of refining, but not destinations. In the midst of this shift, God begins to remove the unnecessary. He closes doors that used to feed your identity. He redirects your energy from old pursuits that no longer serve where he's taking you. You start feeling unsettled in spaces you once felt comfortable. Assignments that used to excite you now feel complete. That doesn't mean you're being unfaithful. It means God is pivoting you. He's pruning even your passions, not to take them away, but not to take them away, but to channel them more effectively. He's showing you that restoration is not always about returning to what was, but about reimagining what can be. This redirection comes with revelation. You begin to see things differently. Ideas come to you with fresh clarity. Patterns that used to trap you are now exposed and broken. What once looked like failure now reveals itself as foundation. The lessons you learned in your wilderness begin to make sense. And even though the direction is changing, you feel more aligned with God than ever before. That's the paradox of restoration. You're moving forward, but you're more rooted in him. Sometimes this shift brings a change in location, relationships, or responsibility, but the divine desire, that deep longing to walk with God and fulfill his purpose, remains intact. In fact, it intensifies. You want his will more than you want your plan. You're willing to let go of what looked right in order to receive what is truly righteous. That kind of surrender is a sign that the healing has taken hold. You're no longer chasing to prove something. You're following to please someone. This directional shift also purifies your motivation. You stop needing validation from people. You're not as swayed by popularity, approval, or applause. Your steps are ordered not by pressure, but by peace. You don't rush to catch up with others. You move at the speed of God. That's restoration. The chaos that once drove your decisions is replaced by calm clarity. You trust the new pace because you trust the one setting it. And even when the next step isn't fully revealed, you no longer panic. You've seen too much of God's faithfulness to doubt his guidance now. What's beautiful about this shift is that it still honors the desire he placed in you long ago. The core of who you are hasn't changed. It's just been refined. The purpose hasn't disappeared. It's just evolving. The anointing hasn't left. It's deepening. Restoration doesn't erase the original assignment. It strengthens your ability to carry it out. God didn't change his mind about you. He's just changing your method. He's repositioning you for impact that couldn't happen in your former place. This shift may not make sense to others, People may question why you're leaving behind what seems successful. They may not understand why you're stepping into something new, but you're not confused. You're compelled. There's a divine pull, a holy nudge, a sense of this is the way, walk in it. That's how God leads in seasons of restoration. He doesn't always send a map. Sometimes he just stirs your spirit, and in that stirring, you realize he's not just restoring what was lost. He's redeeming the time by accelerating your alignment. Relationships begin to align with your assignment when God starts restoring the years you thought were wasted. One of the clearest signs is a divine realignment of the people around you. Some relationships begin to fade without conflict. Others are removed abruptly. And in their place, God begins to send people who not only support your journey, but are synchronized with your purpose. They don't drain your energy. They pour into it. They don't distract from your calling. They sharpen it. These aren't just companions for your comfort. They are collaborators for your calling. For a long time, you may have been surrounded by people who were tied to your history but not aligned with your destiny. They knew the old version of you, the broken version, the survival version. But when God begins to restore, he disconnects you from what was and connects you to what is becoming. He sends people who don't just tolerate your growth. They ignite it. They speak to the calling in you. They don't get intimidated when you start to rise. They don't compete with your assignment. They celebrate it, affirm it, and challenge you to walk in it more fully. Some of the most painful losses you've endured weren't material. They were relational. People walked away. Trust was broken. Support disappeared. In the moment, it felt like rejection. But as God begins to restore, you realize it was protection. He removed what you didn't even know was hindering you. And now, in the place of old attachments, he is sending divine alignments. These relationships may not look impressive from the outside, but they carry spiritual weight. There's a depth, a resonance, a confirmation that this connection is from him. This alignment often starts with a shift in how you see yourself. You no longer feel the need to shrink to keep certain people comfortable. You no longer silence your vision to maintain connection. You start walking boldly, and in that boldness, the right people are drawn to your light. God brings people who speak your language. They understand the warfare because they've fought their own battles. They don't envy your anointing. They respect the cost of it. These are the ones who pray with you, who hold you accountable, who see the vision even when you're too wary to articulate it. The people God sends during restoration are often answers to prayers you forgot you prayed. You didn't ask for a network. You asked for family. You didn't ask for fans. You asked for real fellowship. And God honors that cry by surrounding you with people who don't just see you in the natural, they discern you in the spirit. They help you stay grounded when success comes and remind you of the promise when struggle returns. These aren't just relationships, they're reinforcements. In this season, you may also find that some old connections resurface, but now with clarity and humility. God can heal what was broken, but only if both hearts have been restored. When he does bring certain people back into your life, it's not to relive the past, it's to walk together in a redeemed future. And you'll know the difference. You'll know who's meant to walk with you by the fruit they bear and the peace their presence brings. You also begin to attract people who carry what you need and need what you carry. The relationships are reciprocal, not one-sided. There's mutual sharpening, mutual covering, mutual vision. These aren't just seasonal acquaintances. They're covenant connections. And they don't pull you away from God's presence. They push you deeper into it. You'll know these people by how your spirit responds when you're with them. There's an ease, a flow, a confirmation that this is divine. You won't have to force it, fake it, or fix it. God will cause the right hearts to intersect with yours at the right time. Even mentors and spiritual leaders begin to emerge, not as idols, but as instruments God uses to shape your next season. You're no longer doing it alone. Restoration brings reinforcements. It brings the right hands to help you build what once seemed impossible. It brings conversations that clarify, relationships that align, and partnerships that push purpose forward. These connections are not accidental. They are strategic pieces in the puzzle of your restoration. You begin to walk in new confidence, not arrogance, but the kind of confidence that comes from knowing God is with you. As God restores your lost years, one of the clearest signs is a shift in how you perceive yourself and how you move in the world. This confidence doesn't come from your accomplishments, your talents, or your circumstances. It comes from an unshakable conviction that God has been with you all along, that He is for you, and that He will complete what He started in you. This confidence rises from a deep understanding of who God is and who you are in Him. And it's born out of the trials that you've overcome and the lessons you've learned along the way. For years, you may have struggled with insecurity, questioning whether you were enough, whether you had what it takes. You may have allowed fear to dictate your decisions, holding you back from stepping into the fullness of what God had in store for you. But as God restores you, He begins to reshape how you view your own potential. You stop looking at your limitations and start focusing on His limitless power. You stop measuring your worth by the opinions of others and begin to measure it by the fact that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, a beloved child of God. This new confidence is not about self-sufficiency or striving. It is not about trying to prove your worth to anyone. It is the kind of confidence that comes from surrendering your need for approval and trusting in the truth that God has already approved of you. It's a confidence that comes from knowing you don't have to have it all together because God is working on your behalf. You don't have to be perfect because His strength is made perfect in your weakness. This type of confidence radiates not from your accomplishments, but from your relationship with God. It comes from knowing that when you are aligned with His will, nothing can stand in your way. This restored confidence begins to change how you approach opportunities and challenges. Where you once shied away from stepping into the unknown, you now step forward with assurance. The fear that once held you back is replaced with boldness, a willingness to take risks and trust God, even when the path ahead is unclear. You no longer hesitate to take on new responsibilities, to launch new projects, or to chase dreams that once seemed too big. You've been through enough trials to know that God's grace is sufficient, that His promises are true, and that He will equip you for whatever lies ahead. You begin to see obstacles differently. What once seemed like a threat to your success now feels like an opportunity for God to show His power. You no longer shrink back when faced with difficulty because you know that God is with you and will make a way where there seems to be no way. You've learned that every setback is just a setup for something greater, and as a result, your confidence grows. You no longer allow fear of failure to paralyze you. You take chances, you embrace challenges, and you trust God to lead you through. This newfound confidence also impacts the way you carry yourself in relationships and in public life. You no longer seek validation from others, nor do you base your worth on how others perceive you. You carry yourself with humility, but there is an undeniable strength in your posture. People notice the change. They sense that you've walked through the fire and come out stronger. You no longer feel the need to compete or compare, because you've discovered that God has a unique plan for your life and you are perfectly suited for it. You start to recognize that confidence isn't about being fearless, but about trusting God even in the face of fear. It's about knowing that your identity is rooted in who God says you are and not in the shifting opinions of the world. You walk differently now. You speak differently now. You move through life with purpose and conviction, knowing that you are equipped to fulfill the assignment God has given you. This confidence isn't just for your benefit. It becomes a testimony to those around you. Your confidence becomes contagious, drawing others to the same God who has brought you to this place of restoration. You become a living testimony that God doesn't leave you in your brokenness. He restores, redeems, and elevates. As we reflect on the journey of restoration, we see a powerful truth emerge, that God's process of reclaiming lost years is not just about returning what was taken, but transforming us into the people He always intended us to be. Through divine reversals, alignment of relationships, shifts in direction, and renewed confidence, God is actively working to heal, restore, and elevate us to new levels of purpose. The pain of lost time, while real, is never wasted in God's hands. Each setback, each challenge, and each season of waiting has been part of His divine plan to position you for something greater. As we walk through the restoration process, we must remember that it is not a destination, but a journey, a continual unfolding of God's promises in our lives. In the moments of doubt, in the quiet waiting, and in the seasons of hardship, God is always at work behind the scenes, orchestrating a plan that only He can fully understand. What looks like loss today is setting the stage for the fulfillment of dreams tomorrow. Through divine confirmation, through unlikely voices, and through the steady guidance of His hand, God will lead us into the fullness of His restoration. As you continue to walk this path, remember that you are not alone. The same God who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. Keep trusting, keep moving forward, and keep believing, because restoration is not just about what God will give back to you. It's about the transformation that happens within you as you allow Him to restore, renew, and reposition you for His greater purpose. Your best days are ahead, and God is making sure that the years you thought you lost will be redeemed in ways beyond your imagination.